Hello everybody, welcome back to Fanblade. It is a very rainy day today. I don't know if you can hear it on the roof right now because it's kind of eased off a little bit, but it's coming and going like you wouldn't believe, so a lot of this video might just be done in voiceover. We'll see how we go as we go. I need to put a pickup on this thing. This is the first upright that I made, and the pickup in this one was an absolute revelation to me. A design that I had absolutely no idea if it was going to work or not. One coil per string, and it's just been the most fantastic sounding thing ever. I mean, that design just worked so much better than anything else I've ever tried. When I bought my double bass, I made another one of these pickups. I refined the design ever so slightly, but it sounds great. Despite how good these are, they do have their limitations. Primarily with this one in particular, the A string is just a little bit quieter than the rest of them. And I don't know if that's because the pole piece isn't quite aligned, maybe the coil's not quite up to the same, output as the rest, maybe the string was just off-center from it. Like, there's so much can go wrong. It's very difficult to actually get these right. In fact, on the double bass, if you look very closely, that pickup is not centered, and I do not know why, but just smidging it a bit to the side brought all of the strings in line perfectly, and it sounds amazing. But I do need a way of adjusting the string volume. Now, Tim Sway made a video. Now, Tim Sway's design is radically different to mine. Well, he's still using one coil per string, but he's got a very long, thin coil, whereas I'm using a much wider, flatter design. I see no reason why, with the aid of a 3D printer, I shouldn't be able to make a pickup that is 4 individually sealed and potted coils, all mounted in one housing with individual height adjustment screws, like Gibson-style humbuckers are mounted in a housing, and you can have the screws to adjust the height. That's what I'm thinking here. 4 coils, and you can adjust the height as you so desire. So, it's a bit wet and rainy and cold and miserable, so I'm going to go into the studio where it's warm and do stuff. Just quickly before we get into it, there's been a few changes in the studio which I really should tell you about first. So, the record collection used to go all the way up this wall, and, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my vinyl, love my records, been collecting them my whole life, but half of that stuff was stuff that I'm never going to listen to again, and I just had to face the fact that this area would be much more productively used with a workbench on it. So I sold half my record collection, used the money to buy a 3D printer. The pickup winder now has a permanent home here, and this is essentially my pickup creation station. Now, the process of making a 3D printed pickup is very different to the way that I was doing, well, sort of different, but I'll talk you through it. So what you do is you get onto the Tinkercad website and you start by making some bobbins, then you put some holes in, reinforce the holes, copy and paste, and there's a set of bobbins. Now you need some housings, that's just 2 cylinders, get them the right size, make one into a hole, drop it in, group them together, and that's done. Now for the screw mounts, it's easier to print those separately and then glue them on later. It's all just a bunch of circles with holes in them, you get them in the right place, copy and paste, there they are. For the housing, we're going to need a really big circle with some big square holes, which will cut that down to size, group that together, copy, paste, make the other copy smaller, turn that into a hole, insert it, group it together, done. Now we'll need some holes in the housing, so we'll make some, get them all lined up, and then it is ready to print. Now I had to do the housing separately because the only way to print that was to split it into 2 halves, and my printer bed's not big enough to print the whole thing in one go. So once that's finished printing, I glued the screw mounts in place and pressed the bobbins together using a heavily modified fruit juice press. You attach some copper wire and then it's winding time. About 7,000 reps ought to do it. Solder the wires to the tape, solder some leads on, pop it in the housing, give it a magnet, Yeah, 4 of those please. I mixed up some epoxy to pot them with, but the tolerances are so tight none of the epoxy wanted to seep into the coils, but at least the leads and the magnet are securely attached, and the pickup will actually be slightly microphonic, so it'll get a little bit of the acoustic sound. It's not a bad thing, except then a bad thing happened, and suddenly I had a bit of a mess to clean up. A day or so later and I could put it all together with some stainless 2.5mm screws and an assortment of random springs I found around the place. I decided to stick an inbuilt output jack in there for ease of wiring, and then just protected everything with a bunch of heat shrink. Attach it to the base with some 3M dual lock, and it's done. So, after all of that, you've got to admit, it ain't very nice to look at. It's pretty ugly, in fact, but there's a number of things we can do to make it a bit more attractive, like sanding down the sharp edges, maybe coat it with something to just take away that sort of that 3D printed look. It's just not very nice. It is of course attached with the 3M dual lock. I've given it a little spacer on this side just to give it more surface area to attach to, make it a bit more secure, but it's sort of still wobbles about a bit. Now the output jack, that's not necessarily the actual output jack that's going to have the lead trailing away from it. I can put a patch lead in there and then run that to a control box, either under the fingerboard or maybe possibly behind the bridge. Haven't decided yet. Right now, I just want to take this back into the studio and see how it sounds. Well, I think you'll agree, despite looking like a piece of industrial waste, that actually sounds better than the ones that I have been using. In fact, I might make another one of these for the double bass. Of course, because the epoxy never got all the way into these coils, they are slightly microphonic. Let's do a quick test of the microphonics. Bit of wood. Makes a tapping noise. That's fine. Plug it into the amp. Oh, yeah, that's a microphonic pickup. Normally, not necessarily a good thing, but in this case, it is giving it that acoustic kind of, like the chambers in this body are being allowed to do their thing. Whatever that thing is, I never designed it to do that, but it's doing it. It sounds more like a double bass than my actual double bass. I think the best thing I can do to make that pickup look a bit better is to actually remake the housing out of elm. Then I can stain it and finish it to match the body, and that'll look absolutely fantastic. The problem with it right now is that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and when you have a 3D printer, everything looks like that. I am, however, going to kick that job down the road a bit. I'm not going to do it right now because there's 3 other things that I need to get done primarily to make this thing play really nicely, and that is to sort out the action because it's still a mile high. I also need to sort out the spike because if you were watching that demonstration closely, I was balancing that on a drum seat. This thing, it's designed to be mounted on a thing there and then have a very small weight mounted on the end of it there. It is not designed for 6 kilograms of electric bass pushing down on it. That screw is not strong enough. So I need to essentially find the right length for this to be, and then drill a hole through there, and then I can put a pin in, and that'll just lock it in place nice and solid. I also need to just put a spacer around this end just to take up the gap in there. I mean, honestly, I'll probably just wrap a couple of layers of duct tape around it. Duct tape to the rescue. So the spike is on. The spike is nice and secure, it's at the right height. I was going to put a little locking screw in the back, but I don't need it. Like you can remove it if you give it a good yank, but it doesn't want to fall out on its own, so that's cool. The bridge is at just the right height. It is very nice. E and G strings, perfect. The A and the D, I might just file those saddles out just about a millimetre, maybe not even quite that, just to even them out a little bit. The only other thing is, it is wobbly as hell to play. When you're playing an actual double bass, the body is so large you can brace it against your own body, and then your hands are free to play the instrument. Now, I can't really do that with this one yet. What I've got to solve that problem is a leg off a floor tom. I am simply going to modify this bracket, bolt it to the back, and then have a bit of wood attached here. Brace it against myself, balance the body, my hands will be free to actually play the thing. So yes, this is an offcut of the neck. Probably doesn't need to be quite that long, probably only about there, and then sculpt some nice sort of shapes into it so it'll wrap around me, spike through it, attach that to the back of the bass. Probably not that far away from me, but this will be a fun little project. Ooh, careful. With that made, and sanded out to 240, it is looking pretty good. Feels pretty good too. Apparently I'm that shape. One of the things that I've been needing to get to grips with for quite some time is, of course, UV cured resin. Now, this is a perfect candidate for trying this out because it's comparatively large surface area. I'm going to have to figure out how thin I can brush it on. Is it going to drip everywhere? Is it going to be self-leveling? Will there be bubbles? How long are they going to take to pop? And then, of course, I'm going to take it out in the sunshine because the sun's come out, which is nice. Yes, wave it around and dance around, probably listening to some music, and everybody will think that I'm insane. And they're not wrong. Alright, that is all on there, and it's relatively thick. It's actually quite a bit thicker than I was expecting, so there's sort of no way to put that on thin. But yes, I can see plenty of air bubbles, and I believe this stuff is supposed to be fairly well self-leveling, so I'm sort of just going to stand here and twirl this around, and if I notice any runs or anything happening, then I can come in with the brush and just clean them up and even them out. I don't have to worry about this stuff going off in the garage because there's not a whole lot of natural light in here, but when I go outside, it'll be going very hard, very rapidly. I wonder how long I have to stand here for. Now then, it's about half an hour later, and I've discovered a couple of interesting things. So, first off, there are a lot of air bubbles in this, and I think that is largely because this thing is essentially, except for that surface, and the top there, this thing is almost entirely end grain. Maybe a bit in the middle that's not, but most of this is just end grain, and it's just kind of soaking the resin in. Of course, air bubbles are coming out. I also discovered that if you hit it with an air gun to try and pop the bubbles, yes, the bubbles do pop, but it becomes a lot more liquid. It's quite thick, but when you heat it up, it goes very runny, and it did get very runny indeed. So more bubbles are able to come to the surface, so I'm guessing that's speeding up the process, but yeah, it started dripping everywhere. I believe that the secret to this would lie in sealing the timber first, then, of course, sanding it back to, I don't know, maybe sort of 180 or something, so that the actual UV resin has something to grip onto. Bubbles shouldn't form nearly as badly as they have been, and you would be able to get a nice gloss finish, because it is levelling itself. Like, it looks good. I think what I'm going to do is just take it in its current form, bubbles and all, and walk into the sunlight with it, let that cure, sand it out, and then I'll give it another coat. So that is exactly what I wanted to be seeing. Yes, so we have learned a couple of important things. Number one, seal the wood first before putting the UV on, and a little bit of heat gun will pop the bubbles, will also help it to self-level. And when I say a little bit of heat gun, I'm talking 2 seconds per surface. No more, otherwise it goes too runny. That is looking very, very good. It's not had anywhere near as long as the first time to self-level, and I think that's ready to go outside right now. That's, like, I don't think it's going to get any better than that. Like, it's not perfect, there's still just a couple of little ones, but for a first try and a learning experience, we have definitely learned. It's time for some more interpretive dance. And here it is! It balances against me! How cool is that? Looking quite cumbersome, but it balances against me just right. You know, I can just play that. And then I can do something else. And then I can play it again. And then I can point at someone in the crowd. Obviously, there's a little bit still to do on this. There is no finish on the bridge, there is no finish on the nut. I'm not quite sure how I missed that detail, because it seems like a kind of an important thing to get right. Also, obviously, the pickup. Like, I love the sound of it. I don't really like the way it looks. I will have to do something with that. And also, I'm not a big fan of this thing trailing away there, so I'm going to put a little control box just in behind the bridge, and that is going to let me have a volume knob, for one thing, but I'll also be able to ground the strings, because at the moment, these strings are not grounded. Not that you can tell, they're not buzzing, so I guess the humbucking must be doing its job. So let's get on with playing it then. The drummer has already been in and recorded his part, so now it's just up to me. So I guess that's the end of the series. If I get super enthusiastic at some point, I'll make a case for this, because it will need a fitted case, but I mean, it weighs quite a lot. I can only imagine that a hard case for this is going to top 10 kg. And I don't really want to be lugging that around. I think I'll just see if I can find like a surfboard bag or something to slip it into. That'll probably suffice. We'll see what I can find. With every instrument that I build, I learn so much stuff. It's crazy. Stuff you wouldn't even expect. In building this thing, I've learned all about drill press springs. I've learned that stepper drills do not come in a 14.5mm size unless you order a custom one, and then, you know, you're going to run out of kidneys pretty fast. And just today even, we learned that UV resin, yes you can. 3D printed pickups, yes you can, but you probably shouldn't. So, yes, there's not really a whole lot left to say except thank you for all your comments, thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and I'll see you next week with something completely different.